We're wrapping up this series on artificial intelligence, talking about how AI is going to fundamentally change education with my guest, Dr. Bibi Pirayesh, on this episode of the Speaking Your Brand podcast. More and more women are making an impact by starting businesses, running for office, and speaking up for what matters. With my background as a TV political analyst, entrepreneur, and speaker, I interview and coach purpose-driven women to shape their brands, grow their companies, and become recognized as influencers in their field. This is Speaking Your Brand, your place to learn how to persuasively communicate your message to your audience. Hi, and welcome to the Speaking Your Brand podcast. I'm your host, Carol Cox. We are wrapping up this series that I've been doing all about AI, artificial intelligence. If you haven't listened to the past few episodes, definitely go back and listen to those after you listen to our conversation today. I have Dr. Bibi Pirayesh as my guest, and she's been on the podcast. She was on back in 2020 as the world changed quite dramatically with the COVID-19 pandemic. And we talked about how Bibi was responding to that in her business and also with her speaking engagements, because she was part of the group program that we ran at the time. And then she also joined us for our Thought Leader Academy at the end of 2020. Bibi is an educational therapist, so I invited her on the podcast to talk about how AI is going to radically, and that's my word, we'll see if Bibi agrees or not, radically change education. We're going to talk about what does it mean to educate children? What does that look like? And Bibi has a lot of really intelligent and insightful thoughts about education, special education, and social justice. Bibi, welcome back to the podcast.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be back.
Me too. Can you explain to us what exactly it is to be an educational therapist? Tell us a little bit about the work that you do.
Sure. So educational therapy is basically an approach to teaching students with different types of learning disabilities. So an educational therapist is specifically trained sort of at the cognitive and academic level to work with kids with learning disabilities. So it's similar, somewhat similar maybe to something like speech language pathology, which is very specific to language, but educational therapy has to do with academics in general. So I work with a lot of children who might have a specific learning disability, like in reading, writing, math, ADHD, students who are on the autism spectrum. So basically neurodivergent kids who don't fit that kind of mold that we have in the education system. Personally, and I think this is all educational therapists do this, I've just made my work around it very explicit. There's also a lot of advocacy work, because the issues that I certainly see in my practice is not so much around just what's going on with the student and remediation work, but around actually what is problematic with the school system and the ways in which the school system basically disables the children and ways that we need to remediate that. So there's also a lot of work that I do around that.
And how does social justice fit in with this?
I really see learning disability as a social justice issue. I mean, obviously, disability in general, the disability movement in general has been an integral part, a central part of the civil rights movement from the beginning. But learning disability specifically, I don't know that we talk about it enough as a social justice issue, but it is. And there are, very kind of severe places where we can see that, for example, in the, what we call the school to prison pipeline, or, the fact that such large majorities of people who are incarcerated have learning disabilities, diagnosed or undiagnosed. So, there are ways in that it's just very apparent in our larger systems. But then there is also all the small ways, because the way that special education law is written, or education, we have to remember, is not really considered a right in our country. So the school system is really only required by law to allow for access. And so there's no protection, or there's no really even effort to make sure that students are meeting their true potential. And so just the way that the law is written excludes a lot of students from access to power, which is essentially what social justice is to me. So I think it's a big issue, and it's one that we don't talk about enough. So that's why I try so hard to constantly be talking about it.
And Bibi, I just remembered that you also spoke at our Brave Bold Beyond live virtual summit. This was an online event that we held that was live, day long. We had incredible speakers like you deliver 10-minute TED-style talks. And I remember the opening story that you shared was when you were young, maybe about 7 years old, you noticed that your dad wasn't very good at something. And I think that really opened your eyes about this idea of learning and education and our talents and skills.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously the time, that my father was growing up, there was really, especially because I'm Iranian. And so growing up in Iran, there was really no understanding of learning disabilities at all. Everyone just got ranked in terms of intelligence. And I remember that because he was a very bright person. He was an entrepreneur, but he, in direct contrast to my mom, who was very sort of scholarly and very good at school, there was just this moment where I felt such shame in him as he kind of, in a very vulnerable way, revealed to me that he wasn't able to write well, and that like even when he was trying to draw something, he struggled with it. It was like a light bulb moment where I realized, oh, you can be really bright, but not be able to do the tasks that schooling requires. And it was an important moment because in the schooling experiences that I was having, it was so incredibly hierarchical. And kids who didn't fit were treated really quite violently. And so it was just this light bulb moment that made me think, oh, okay, maybe intelligence isn't just reduced to what we do in school.
And I'll share a link to your talk, your speech from our summit in the show notes so that listeners can go listen to it. It was an incredible, impassioned talk. I loved it. So Bibi, let's talk about what is the purpose of education. I know that seems like a very simple question, but I actually don't think it has a simple answer. So can we talk about first, what is it that our current present day school system sees as the purpose, the goal of education? And then we'll contrast that with what you feel like really perhaps should be the goal. And then we'll lead into the AI conversation from there.
I mean, I don't think that's a simple question at all. I think that, educators and philosophers have been trying to answer that question forever. In our current culture and current system, it seems to me anyway, that the purpose of education and the purpose of our education system is essentially to prepare people for the workforce. I mean, that really seems to be it. And I think that, historically, we know that the kind of schooling experiences that we set up were essentially a way to get people to then go into different factories and, work there. Now the job market requires different skills like critical thinking and writing and this and that. So we're kind of pushing those, but we're still pushing it into essentially the same basic fundamental system with the same ideology, where what we're really trying to do is to train you for the workforce, and the workforce is going to require different levels of people. So we're going to, quite purposely, even though we don't talk about it that way, we're going to train people for those different levels. So, the children who come from wealthier backgrounds, et cetera, get access to schooling experiences that train them for sort of like higher level CEO kind of creative roles. And then there's like a hierarchy that goes all the way down to, okay, some of you are just essentially being trained how to follow orders, how to sit still, how to say yes, all of that. So, I think for all intents and purposes, I mean, even in the most wealthy, well-resourced areas, for example, areas that I tend to do a lot of work in, essentially what you see is that the entire schooling experience is aimed at getting you to college, and then college is very much aimed at getting you into the workforce. And the success of education is measured by, did you get into a good college? And the success of good colleges, did you get a good job, and good being, high paying. So I think that's really the idea. I mean, capitalism, I think, is what basically defines what our education system is for right now. It's odd because the ideological roots of our education maybe aren't quite like that. When you read John Dewey, you were thinking, no, it's all about democracy and, creating conscious citizens and equity and all of these things. But that's not really what we see in practice.
Yeah, Bibi, thank you for that. That was so well put together. So this is one paradigm. This is the paradigm we've been living under since really, I guess, public schooling became a thing in the United States in the 1800s, the 19th century to the present day. So that is the current paradigm. And as we talk a lot about on this podcast, the idea behind thought leadership a lot of times is that we're challenging current paradigms and bringing to light a potential new paradigm that could be better. Bibi, what do you feel like should be the purpose and goal of education? What should this new paradigm look like?
Again, there are a lot of people who have contributed to this conversation in really intelligent ways. But I think that the question around what is the purpose of education is, directly tied to the question of what does it mean to be human? What is the purpose of kind of having a human life here on Earth? Because the idea should be that whatever education we have is in service of that and should be in support of that and should be kind of helping us gain the skills and supporting us in the actualization of our humanity, whatever that means. And I think that's one of the reasons why, this AI conversation is so interesting right now, because it kind of gets at the heart of exactly that. Education in recent years has been under a lot of, even more so than usual. I mean, it's always been under attack, I feel like, in the US. Again, I think because of capitalism, because, so much of our education system is fueled by what happens in a private industry. And we have constantly seen reform movement after reform movement. And there's this political rhetoric around how our school system is broken and how we have to fix it. And then, we bring in a whole new reform system and somehow it doesn't really fix it. And it's because we don't fix the ideological roots or address the ideological roots. We just keep changing the curtains, so to speak. But in recent years, I think, one, because especially higher education has become so incredibly expensive, and students are just debt-ridden and they're entering into an economy where they can't really, they're not having experiences where this expensive education is going to even give you the leg up in terms of work, which was at least originally the plan. So there's been a lot of questioning and pushback on what is the purpose of that. And then I think a lot of technological advances. I mean, if I can essentially get whatever I want on my phone or ask Google or, figure it out on my calculator, whatever it is, like, why do I need all this formal schooling? And then there's been, other ideological wars, I think, around what is allowed in education and what isn't, and how is, schooling and teaching, indoctrinating children in sort of these different political halves of the country and all the wars that have come out. And then, of course, there was the pandemic, which really shifted things and I think really put an incredible amount of pressure on teachers, and then brought up these questions around, well, is my role really a teacher? Am I just babysitting your children so that you can get to work? I mean, so there's been a lot of, all of these questions have always been there, but like the last few years, I think it's all really come into the forefront. And then now with this new introduction of AI, I think that we really, really have to ask some of these really important questions. And I know that people fall under a lot of categories when it comes to kind of dealing with this AI thing. I've read articles and heard people speak about how this is the end of the English essay, and students are just going to cheat on everything. And I read something a couple days ago about how this is the end of the flipped classroom, because we're not going to be able to really trust that kids are reading and writing outside of the classroom so that we can use classroom time for discussion. And instead, classroom time is really going to have to be used for evaluation, because that's the only place where we can, test them, knowing that they're not going to be cheating. So there's, people on this side, and then there are people on the other side. Like I read something, I think it was at the Wharton School of Business, gave one of their exams and found out like a huge percentage of students were already basically cheating using AI. And so some professors are very actively, and some school teachers too are very actively bringing in like ChatGPT, et cetera, into their curriculum and expecting students to, for example, teaching critical thinking using ChatGPT, have the program write your essay and then go through and critique, like, what are the ways that it worked? What are the ways that it didn't work? And, some educators are like, well, we just have to go with the flow and kind of make sure that we adjust, because this is the new world. This is a new reality. And there's no question that that AI is going to change education, much in the way that the internet, for example, did, being able to get on Google and just Google anything and get answered. That was a huge difference than the way that, you and I, not to age us so much,
for sure.
when I grew up. And, people, we all had to adjust to that. And, there's already all of these programs that are coming out that are going to be able to tell if something was created by ChatGPT or not. So there's a lot of hoopla kind of around it, which is to be expected. My sort of thinking about it is, how do we use this new paradigm shift that's happening in our reality to ask the important questions about the paradigm of what does it mean to be educated, or what is the purpose of education, and what does it mean to be human? And I think the best article, and I've been reading kind of a lot of different things on it, but the best article that I read on the topic was actually, I think it was in The Guardian. It was a discussion with the musician Nick Cave. I don't know if you're familiar with it. I'm a big fan of his music. But it was essentially I don't know what kind of discussion it was, but at some point, someone in the audience was able to send him a song that was written by ChatGPT to get his input on it. And his response was this song sucks. This is not a good song. And of course, we know that what these programs can do today is basically their worst version. They're going to continue to get better. But he said something really important, I thought, and poignant, that I think relates to this larger conversation. And he said, or at least I understood, and I'm paraphrasing, but I understood what he said to mean, look, it's not about the song, it's not about the poem, it's not about the product that gets produced and gets out there. Right now, because I guess he was at the time working on an album, he's like, when I sit at the piano, I have to bleed out this song that I'm going to be writing. And that's what songwriting is. It's not the product. And I think that's really, really important, because even as we look back on all the technological shifts that we've had, and everything has been completely turned upside down already and will continue to be so. But none of what has happened, and I don't think anything even that will come, is going to change the core experience of being human. Nothing is going to make it, any different. When you grieve the loss of someone you love, when you grieve the loss of love or a relationship, when you, experience joy in intimacy or friendship with someone, when you, the pain of the heart, earned wisdom, when you've been backstabbed at work or something. These are the things that make you human, because educators have been dealing with this question for a long time. Students, every time I have to work with a student around algebra, I still get the question, why do I have to do this? I'm never going to use this in my life. What is the point of this? And of course, the answer to that question is, you're probably never going to use any of this in your real life. You don't even have to really learn your times table, because we all have a phone in our hand. But the purpose of that, the purpose of learning your times table, is that it builds your your memory capacity, and it helps you really understand the logic of numbers. And the reason that you do algebra, or you learn a language or whatever, is so that you can build neuronal connections for logical stepwise thinking. And that's what you're really going to be using. And I think it's the same, with these other conversations is, what is the purpose of writing an essay if I can just have ChatGPT do it, right? And I think that's a really important question. Like, what are educators teaching if what they're teaching can just be done by a computer? And the answer to that, I think, again, and it's the thing that is getting missed all the time in our education system now, because our education system is about the product. It is about the 5-paragraph essay. It's not about the experience of, understanding, going through the process of how do I collect my thoughts about a topic and express them. In some ways, it's the same old question, but now being introduced and brought back to us in a much more immediate way. And so I do think that as educators, we have to ask ourselves, what is what is it that I'm trying to teach? And is it, if I'm just teaching these skills because these are skills they need for a job, but a computer program can do it, essentially everyone's going to be jobless now. And I think that's one of the big fears too right now, because, as technology has developed, a lot of jobs have become obsolete. Like, we don't really have like someone be our travel agent anymore, because we can all do that ourselves. And I think what ChatGPT and other programs are doing is they're now making kind of higher level jobs that were maybe always safe from technology now be suddenly it's not so sure. I mean, if a computer program can write, and writing is one of the highest level skills that we have, what does that mean for people who have jobs at these higher levels? And then I think that brings up all kinds of questions around social justice that are really important, and access that are really important, which I hope we'll talk about. But generally speaking, I think that the conversation is getting to the core of having to ask, what is the purpose of an education, or what is the purpose of educators? And I think that that's a really, really important question for educators to ponder. And I think in the best case scenario, these kinds of technologies should push us toward getting closer to our actual purposes as human beings. But of course, I don't think that will be the case. And I think it'll be really quite horrible, because that's what tends to happen with human beings. I won't get into that, but yeah, that's sort of my thoughts on it.
Oh my gosh, Bibi, so good. So first of all, you are literally one of the smartest, most brilliant people I know. And so I feel so validated, because the podcast episode I did a few weeks ago about how to thrive in the age of AI, I talked about this exact question, like, what does it mean to be human when these AI tools can do so much of this knowledge work, information work, which for so long we thought was safe from technology and automation? And I talked about a lot what you talked about, it, experience, emotion, right? Everything from joy to loss, excitement, disappointment, grief, all of those things that we experience as humans. And like being embodied, like literally being embodied. And I know, like, as someone who is an academic, I live most of my life in my head. I forget like so much about what it means to actually be human and be in a body. And I feel like maybe we're going to rediscover so much of that, because we have this contrast with what the AI can do versus what it just literally cannot do, which is being in a human body.
Well, that actually is a huge, there's so much literature and critique of Western epistemologies and Western empiricism, and this idea that it is actually very disembodied. So when you look at science sort of empiricism being that which you can measure, when you look at our academic world in general, it is actually very disembodied. Nowadays, when everything is on Zoom, even more disembodied. One of the things that we talk about a lot in the special education world is the importance of a multisensory approach. So really bringing the child back into the body and back into the senses, because all of those things have to be building on top of each other in order for development to happen. And I think all of us who sort of work in these, sort of more academic worlds are absolutely disembodied. And that is a huge critique and a very valid critique. I think of Western science in general, and it's not by accident that sort of like the peak now invention and offering of Western psychology and Western science is now this like computer that can think, but is completely disembodied. A huge part of what it means to be human is to basically live in a body. And we miss out on that, I think, in our modern age a lot. And then we're told, oh, you have to meditate and kind of like get back into your body or whatever. But that should be our everyday, all day experience. And it's not, and you sort of see it at every single level. I was listening to an interview with Anthony Bourdain a little while ago, and he was talking about how food, how in the modern world, we became so obsessed with like, okay, what is the quickest way that I can just get something into my body and move on with my disembodied life? And how so much of his work was about kind of coming back and saying, no, this experience that you get to taste food and that you get to kind of, you plant it, you grow it, you watch it, you cook it, like all of those things are really unique things that we should cherish, as we only get this one experience here on the planet. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Again, and this was, when all the whole meta stuff was beginning, when now we all like get to have like an avatar or something.
Like literally disembodied selves in the metaverse.
Exactly, literally disembodied. And I remember at the time thinking about, this is going to be horrible for children with different types of learning disabilities, because we're making everything less and less and less and less sensory. And believe it or not, that is actually going to prevent our brains from being able to develop in healthy ways. So, Marianne Wolf, who is a really important scholar kind of in the area of reading, her more recent book was about, because, reading itself, being able to read in a two-dimensional book, that itself is a human invention, and it's an invention that really changed our brain. Our brains are not wired to read. This is one of the reasons why we have dyslexia, because that's not like an intuitive thing for the human mind. And it changed the human brain. And, she talks about how now in this digital world, it's going to again change the human brain. And the other day I came, in this AI discussion, they were talking about how they're coming up with this new program where you text, like you put something in text and the program creates a video out of it. Or vice versa. That's going to be mind-boggling for the brain, and it is absolutely going to change our brains. But then again, it comes back to this question of even if it changes the brain, even if it rewires it, does it really change the core of the human experience? Which to me is, the bleeding out that Nick Cave was talking about. And I don't think that it will. I don't think that it will.
All right, Bibi. Okay, so much good stuff. First, it reminds me that, Diane Diaz and I went to a TEDx event recently for where they had 15 speakers. This is the local TEDx chapter, and they had prepared their speakers. And there was one speaker in particular, and he talked about how important music was to him and, in his education and growing up. And then at the end, he finished his talk, and then they ended up having some extra time between speakers. So they brought up out a keyboard and had him play a piece of music. And as I was watching him play it, and it was a lovely piece, I'm not sure what it was exactly, because I'm not that musically inclined, but I was, watching him and listening to it. And I thought to myself, sure, an AI could write a piece of music. It could play that particular piece of music. It does already. There's AI tools that can do that. And they're lovely. But watching the joy on his face as he played, that's what made the moment for me not the level of skill he happened to have to play that piece of music.
Exactly. And that's the thing. The thing about being human is the experience of being human. And the AI, I mean, it kind of breaks my heart. Like, as intelligent as it can be, it will never have the human experience. And so that's why I think, as the idea is that we can, I mean, technology, it has always been about how do we delegate all of the hard stuff, the hard parts of being human, so that we can have the good parts of being human. Unfortunately, that's not what usually happens. I mean, with all of our technology, human beings are more stressed today than ever. And I feel like, unfortunately, this AI stuff is just going to add to our stress. But if you deal with it very consciously, and that's not going to be the way that the larger culture deals with it, but if you deal with it consciously, then yes, the idea is that you still have to do the hard work. In order for you to have the experience of playing music, you have to do the hard work of learning how to play that piece. And maybe you'll never learn it as well as the computer program can, but you have something that it will never have. Although who knows, in the future, maybe.
Well, Bibi, it reminds me of the movie Her, which, believe it or not, came out 10 years ago. I mean, they were so ahead of their time. And actually, I rewatched it recently in light of all this AI stuff that's been going on. And that was exactly the whole point with the AI in the movie, is that they really wanted to have a human experience. And so I don't want to get into this right now, but this whole discussion of what happens when the AIs realize they're not human, they don't have bodies, and then what are they going to want from us or not? Like, this is the topic of science fiction movies, but it's not going to be science fiction for much longer.
Did you see the film Ex Machina?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, that's another one that, I was just like, oh, this is not that far into the future. Yeah, I mean, I think at some level we have to just be like, we're going to be sharing the planet with robots, essentially, or at least with artificial intelligence. And that's just going to be a part of our reality. I mean, there are days when I wake up and I'm like, oh, I'm so happy I'm already halfway through. Like, I don't think I can deal with this world.
Yes, I know. I feel the same way. Like, I'm so glad I'm not 20. Yes. I don't know how I would feel if I was 20.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. So you mentioned about, what educators are doing with these AI tools. I did an episode all about ChatGPT and some of these image generator tools, which are absolutely incredible. And that was from a couple of weeks ago. In addition to running Speaking Your Brand, I also teach business and marketing classes at a university, and I've been doing that since 2009, so a really long time. My approach to the course curriculum, creating the course curriculum and teaching the students, and these are digital marketing students, they're getting their bachelor's degree in digital marketing, is to approach it with how can I help them kind of understand, the bigger role of marketing, what it is that they're getting into, but ultimately to give them the tools and resources to think for themselves, because these things change all the time. Like what I taught if I teach a specific tool 10 years ago, it's going to change. But in December, when ChatGPT came out and I started using it, I was like, okay, well, first of all, this is definitely going to change the marketing industry. Probably first and foremost, besides education, is marketing is going to be dramatically impacted. Blog posts can be written, social media posts can be written, emails can be written literally with just a few text prompts. So I see a lot of educators who want to stick their head in the sand, prohibit it, say absolutely not. Students are not allowed to use any of these AI tools, and then punish them for doing that. And I take the opposite approach, because these tools are here. They're not going away. Sure, there may be some regulations or fine tuning of them, but we really need to see how we can use them to enhance and to help students learn. So I've incorporated them in some of the assignments that the students do. There's some assignments where I say, don't use the AI tools. There's really no point in using them. Like, you need to go do this on your own anyways. But some of them I explicitly say, go use ChatGPT. For example, one of them, they have to do a discussion post where they write their unique value proposition for their business idea. So like, what makes your business idea great? Why do people want to buy it? They write it themselves. Then they go put it in ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT to improve it. And it comes back and I ask them, okay, so analyze, what did you like better or not about what the tool gave back? And most of the time they like it better, because ChatGPT is really good at understanding marketing and sales language. But here's what I found so refreshing is that they said, oh, I understand now how to improve the words that I use to make what I'm writing more compelling and more enticing. So they're actually learning. They're not using it to cheat, because if I just said prohibited it, said you can't use it, everyone wants to get a shortcut or wants to find a way when they need to save time. But instead, they're actually learning much more at an individual level than I have time to do for each student.
I completely agree. And I think that there is real opportunity for teaching critical thinking skills around ChatGPT. I also think that, because I work with kids with learning disabilities, one of the things that I've been thinking about is how is this going to give more access to those kids? So in a case like that, if I put a blank sheet of paper in front of a child who has, let's say a language disorder, or a reading disability or writing disability, and I said, okay, I want you to write blah, 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 they're not going to be able to do that, right? And so they are never going to be able to practice those other skills that are really important that come after you've already written that first piece. So I think, and a lot of times in our work with kids, we have to provide that, and then they can build on that. Otherwise, they're just stuck at that beginning point forever. And I was actually thinking, I remember when, I was myself an English language learner, and I remember when we had to do the college essay, and I just had, it was just like I was so paralyzed by the idea. What would I even say? And how would I communicate what it is that I need to say? And how am I going to make sure that it looks the right way? It's sort of up to par with, and it was just such an overwhelming and paralyzing experience. The fact of the matter was that I actually had an incredible wealth of experiences and point of view to share that I think that any of the colleges that I was applying to would have been really, really interested in. But that inability, because I was an English language learner, was just really, really getting in the way of that. So, what if, for example, I had access to a tool like this back then, and to what extent would I have been able to use it to really express myself? And then, then the question is that really cheating? Is the university more interested in whether I can write this like perfect sentence, or are they more interested in how well I can kind of share and what have I gleaned from my actual real experiences in life, et cetera? So I think we really have to move away from, and I still understand, like, you have to learn the skills. I'm not saying that you don't, but how could we use this technology to actually teach those skills instead of using it again as a punitive thing, which is basically what we do in all of education. And that's an ideological problem.
Yeah. So good, Bibi. Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, I really feel like there are so many opportunities if educators are willing, and not just educators, but also the school systems are willing to be innovative and being willing to think beyond what their kind of instinctual reaction is, which is just to shut it all down. And I think that's unfortunate. All right. So Bibi, again, you are so brilliant. I so enjoy having these conversations with you. So for those of you listening, this is part 1 of our conversation, because Bibi is going to be back on the podcast in, probably about a month or so, because we're going to be talking about, for Women's History Month in March, about what has been going on in Iran with the protest by girls and women, and that had started back in 2022. And so because Bibi was born in Iran, she came to the United States when she was young, but I wanted to have her also on the podcast to talk about that, because it's something that I have been watching and following, and it's been inspiring to me, but I know Bibi can give us a lot more of the context and the history of that. For those of you listening, also in the show notes, we'll have a link to Bibi's website as well as to her LinkedIn profile. So to make sure to connect with her there. Bibi, thank you so much for coming on to have this incredible conversation about how AI is impacting the education industry and what the possibilities are.
Thank you so much, Carol. As always, thank you.
Until next time, thanks for listening.